More on this, let's go live to Yunus Sona, a political scientist and former deputy chairman of the Turkish Vatan Party. Welcome to RT International.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Now, the UK PM Boris Johnson said earlier that the conflict in Ukraine is not NATO's fight. How accurate to believe that statement to be, especially given that many NATO countries have pumped hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid into Ukraine?
I think we can interpret this message of Johnson as a small acknowledgement of defeat, that he was not able to pull the European allies back behind his position to further escalating the conflict in Ukraine. And do not forget, there is serious fractions within the European countries and between European countries and Britain in that matter as well. Just remember the conflicts that led to the fact of Brexit, and just remember, for instance, currently that heading towards presidential elections, all French candidates, presidential candidates, to different degrees announced a distancing from NATO. So I think Johnson's statement is an acknowledgement that there is no consensus in the Western camp towards further escalating the conflict.
Well, and talking of consensus, Turkey finds itself in an unusual position at the moment, being a NATO member, but it also has very close ties with Russia. Can you tell me more about that, please?
Well, I think Turkey needs here to focus on its own national security interests. That means focusing on the fact that we have lived here in Turkey through 3 different coup d'etats organized by the United States and its NATO allies in 1971, in 1980, and lastly in 2016. Turkey faces NATO-supported ethnic separatist organization PKK in the north of Syria. Turkey faces NATO exercises along its shores in the eastern Mediterranean. So Turkey, I think, is forced to acknowledge that a further expansion of NATO towards the east of Europe is also not only circling Russia, but it's also a measure of circling Turkey. So I think this is slowly but surely gaining ground in Turkish politics as well. We have observed that recently the coalition partner, if you will, of the governing AKP, the Party of National Action, their chairman stated that though rejecting the Russian invasion in Ukraine, they also rejected the expansion of NATO towards Eastern Europe. So I think this is the point where Turkey should focus on it. It is a contradictory situation for us, being a NATO member, but being a NATO member, we have been threatened by NATO for the last 50 years, including with NATO allies supporting terror organizations inside Turkey and along Turkey's borders. So slowly but surely, I think this observation will gain ground in Turkish politics, and it should so.
Mm-hmm. Now, President Putin and the Turkish leader Erdogan, they had a phone call earlier about the situation in Ukraine. How much common ground do you think the leaders share in terms of resolving the conflict, and what role do you think the Turkish leader can play in that?
I think the Turkish government can play a very positive role if it focuses on its own, as I mentioned, national security interests. This is not a conflict between Ukraine and Russia. This is a conflict between NATO expanding towards what I would call Eurasian countries. Currently, it's Russia, but tomorrow it will be Turkey. And it has been yesterday, actually, Turkey as well. As I mentioned, we had a coup d'etat here in 2016, supported by NATO forces inside Turkey as well. So if the Turkish government focuses on that broader scope, and if it acknowledges that the conflict in Ukraine is a conflict between NATO, led by the United States, and the Eurasian side, currently led by Russia, but with China and India and several Latin American countries behind it, then it will play a positive role in not only pushing back NATO, but also in really achieving or contributing to regional and global peace. I think that is the path to follow. Mm-hmm. And this scope needs to go beyond small and short-term economic interests as well. This is very important.
Mm-hmm. Well, talking about economic interests and sanctions and the whole policies of the situation, the Kremlin said that the Turkish leader did criticize the discrimination Russians are now facing in the West. As we've heard, MasterCard and Visa have withdrawn, and now many Russians will struggle to access their cash. They're also facing discrimination because of the Ukrainian conflict. How serious a problem do you think this is?
I think this is really a serious problem. Let us listen to what US President Biden recently said in his State of the Union, where he, I quote, said that the free world has been shaken. Well, free world in that context means the world free to join NATO and to accept US dominance within the alliance. So he's defending actually Ukrainian government's freedom to submit itself to NATO control and dominance. So this is a serious conflict, and we are facing, concerning the sanctions, the US claim of the so-called unipolar world. They are trying hard to organize this unipolar world. They are trying hard to organize it in security, in energy. They are intervening into global energy markets. They are trying to force everyone to sell strategic reserves of oil, for instance. And they are trying to keep up the system going under their dominance and guidance. And we can simply measure their success by taking a look at the oil price or the gas price. They fail in that. So this is a reflection that sanctions are failing as well. And I think this is a profound conflict. It goes well beyond Ukraine. This is very important to acknowledge that this conflict is about US global dominance. And it's very contested right now, currently in Ukraine, but in other parts of the world as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Yunus Sona, political scientist and former deputy chairman of the Turkish Vatan Party, thank you very much for sharing your opinions on the Ukraine conflict at the moment. Thank you.